Freya began dating Owen in her second year of high school. With a fast smile and a charisma that brightened every space, he was a star on the soccer squad. He seemed to be the only person who truly understood 16-year-old Freya, someone who could see past her reserved demeanor to the fantasies she had. They spent hours after school discussing their ambitious plans, which included moving out, renting a small apartment in an interesting place, and perhaps even launching a joint venture. Freya could already picture it, a life built side by side, something unstoppable. She was sure their love was the forever kind. But that all shifted after graduation caps hit the ground in summer, blurred into fall. Owen started pulling away, like a tide retreating from the shore. Texts went unanswered for hours, then days. Their walks in the park dwindled to almost nothing. When they did meet up, he'd steer every conversation toward his own goals, how he needed to ace his college entrance exams, how he'd set his sights on a top-tier university like Georgetown or Stanford. One crisp October afternoon, as the leaves turned golden red, he stopped mid-stride on the gravel path by the park's old oak trees. "Freya, we need to talk," he said, his voice clipped, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Her stomach tightened, a cold knot forming. "Is something wrong?" she asked, brushing a strand of dark hair from her eyes, trying to read his face. He kicked at a pebble, eyes fixed on the ground. "Look, it's just, our relationship doesn't fit anymore. I've got plans, big ones. I'm applying to schools, chasing a career." And this he waved a hand vaguely between them. "Still not meeting her gaze, it's holding me back." Freya blinked, the words slicing through her like a jagged edge. "Holding you back." She echoed, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "I thought we were in this together. You said we'd figure it all out, college, life, everything." "I know what I said." Owen finally looked up, but his hazel eyes were distant, resolute. "I'm sorry, Freya. I've made up my mind. It's better this way for both of us." His tone was final, like a door slamming shut. She stood there, rooted to the spot, as he turned and walked off down the path. His familiar blue jacket grew smaller with every step, and he didn't glance back, not once. The autumn wind picked up, tugging at her scarf, but she barely felt it. Her chest ached, a hollow kind of hurt that spread until it swallowed her whole. How could he toss aside everything they'd dreamed up together like it was just extra baggage he didn't need? For a long time, Freya stayed there, staring at the empty trail, the crunch of leaves underfoot fading into silence. Her heart was in pieces, scattered like the debris around her. But as the days turned into weeks, she realized this was only the start of her struggles. A few weeks after Owen vanished from her life, Freya's world took another gut punch. The signs had been creeping up: missed periods, a stomach that churned at the smell of coffee. She'd slipped out to the corner drugstore, snagged a test, and locked herself in the upstairs bathroom, heart thudding as she waited. Now she sat at the scratched-up kitchen table in her family's tidy suburban home, her hands trembling as she clutched the pregnancy test. Two pink lines stared back, mocking her, a neon sign screaming a truth she couldn't dodge. "Freya, dinner's ready. Come on, it's getting cold." Her mom hollered from the kitchen, her voice bright and oblivious over the clatter of dishes. Freya shoved the test into her sweatshirt pocket, the plastic digging into her palm. She dragged herself to the dining room, each step heavier than the last. The air smelled of meatloaf and gravy, a Tuesday ritual. Her dad sat at the head of the table, glasses slipping down his nose as he scanned the Riverside Gazette. Her mom swept in, apron streaked with flour, balancing a casserole dish and a bowl of mashed potatoes. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you," Freya mumbled, hovering by her chair, her voice thin and shaky. Her dad folded the paper with a rustle, peering at her over the rims of his glasses. "What's this about, huh?" You look like you've seen a ghost." Her mom froze mid-scoop, the serving spoon dangling, gravy dripping onto the tablecloth. "Freya, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tightening, eyes darting over her daughter's pale face. Freya's chest squeezed, her breath hitching. "I'm pregnant." She choked out the words, splintering as they hit the air. Silence crashed down like a guillotine. The spoon clattered to the floor, splattering gravy across the linoleum. Her mom's hand flew to her throat, a strangled gasp escaping. Her dad's face went from pink to a boiling red, veins bulging at his temples. The newspaper hit the table with a smack. "Pregnant!" Her mom shrieked, fumbling for the napkin in her apron, twisting it into knots. "Freya Marie, you disgrace us. How could you be so stupid, so reckless? What's everyone going to say?" "Hold on, Ellen," her dad cut in, voice low and dangerous. Shoving his chair back so hard it screeched, he stood, looming over them, fists clenched. "You're telling me you've gone and ruined your life and ours? Who's the father, huh? That Owen kid who's been sniffing around?" Freya flinched, tears stinging her eyes. It's complicated. He's gone, Dad. But I can handle this, I swear. I'll figure it out." "Handle it." Her mom snapped, voice rising to a near hysterical pitch. "You're 17. You think you can just figure out a baby. What about school? What about us? The neighbors will talk. The church will talk. I didn't mean for this to happen." Freya shot back, her own voice cracking as she gripped the table's edge. "You think I wanted this. I'm scared too. But I'm not running away from." It, her dad's laugh, was bitter, a harsh bark. "Scared? You should be. You've got no idea what you've done." He jabbed a finger at her, his eyes blazing. "This isn't some little mistake you can fix with an apology. You're not raising a kid under my roof. End of story." "Paul, don't," her mom started, but he whirled on her. "Don't, Ellen, coddle her. She's thrown everything we gave her back in our faces." He turned back to Freya, his voice like steel. "You want to play grown up? Fine. Handle it somewhere else. Get out." Freya's tears broke free, streaming down her face. "You're kicking me out just like that. I'm still your daughter." "Not right now, you're not," he growled, stomping toward the living room, his footsteps shaking the floor. "You've made your bed. Lie in it." Freya stumbled back to her room, the weight of her parents' rejection sinking into her bones like a stone dragging her underwater. Her dad's words, "Get out," echoed in her skull sharp and unrelenting, while her mom's sobs faded into a dull hum downstairs. She yanked her old duffel bag from under the bed, hands shaking as she stuffed it with whatever she could grab, a couple of sweaters, her favorite jeans, the little notebook where she'd scribbled dreams that now felt like taunts. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to scream failure. Every glance at the glow and the dark stars on her ceiling, a stab of grief for the girl she used to be. Fear clawed at her chest, fear of the unknown, of the tiny life inside her, of being utterly alone, but she swallowed it down, zipping the bag shut with a final defiant tug. She paused at her desk, snatching the framed photo of her and Owen from last summer, his arms slung around her, both of them grinning at the county fair. For a second, she almost hurled it against the wall, but instead, she shoved it into the bag's side pocket. Let it be a reminder, she thought bitterly, of what trust could cost. Downstairs, the dining room was a graveyard of untouched food, the meatloaf congealing in its dish. Her mom sat hunched at the table, sniffling into her napkin, while her dad's absence roared louder than his yelling ever had. He'd barricaded himself in the garage, no doubt. Freya hovered in the doorway, her throat tight. "I'm leaving," she said, voice raspy but steady, the duffel strap biting into her shoulder. Her mom's head snapped up, eyes red and puffy. Freya, wait. Just think about this. Where are you even going? Does it matter? Freya shot back, the hurt spilling out. You heard Dad. I'm not welcome here. You're twisting this. Her mom cried, standing so fast the chair wobbled. We're upset, yes, but running off isn't the answer. What about school? What about upset? Freya cut in, her voice rising despite the tears burning her eyes. You called me a disgrace. Dad told me to get out. What am I supposed to do? Pretend that didn't happen? Her mom opened her mouth, then closed it, clutching the edge of the table like it was the only thing holding her up. We just need time, she whispered, almost to herself. Time's up, Freya said, turning away. Before her resolve cracked, she grabbed her coat from the hook by the door, the familiar weight of it a small comfort, and stepped onto the front porch. The January air hit her like a slap, sharp and frigid, stinging her cheeks and seeping through her sneakers. Snow dusted the lawn, the streetlights casting a pale glow over their quiet cul-de-sac. She stood there, breath fogging in the dark, the duffel pulling at her arm as reality crashed in. She had nowhere to go. No Owen. No home. No plan except one. Grandma Alina. Her dad's mom lived 2 hours away in Springfield, in a little brick house with a sagging porch and a garden that bloomed even in winter. Freya hadn't seen her since Christmas, but she could still hear Alina's gravelly voice over the phone. You're always welcome here, kid. Always. She'd never turn Freya away, not like this. Freya fished her phone from her pocket, fingers numb as she scrolled to her grandmother's number. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. Freya, that you? Alina's voice crackled through, warm but edged with surprise. It's late. What's going on? Grandma, Freya started, her voice breaking as the dam finally burst. I need to come stay with you. Can I come now? There was a pause, a rustle on the other end, maybe Alina shifting in her old recliner. What's happened, honey? You sound shook up. I'll explain when I get there, Freya said, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Please, just can I come? Of course you can, Alina replied, firm and no nonsense. Get yourself here safe. I'll put the kettle on. Freya hung up, the promise of shelter steadying her just enough to move. She glanced back at the house one last time, the warm light spilling from the windows, the silhouette of her mom still at the table, and then turned toward the bus stop at the end of the street, the winter wind howling at her back. Freya stepped off the Greyhound bus in Springfield just past midnight, her sneakers crunching on the frost-dusted pavement of the station lot. The 2-hour ride had been a blur of headlights and half-formed regrets, her bag a heavy anchor on her lap. She trudged the 3 blocks to Alina Street, the cold biting deeper with every step until the little brick house came into view, its sagging porch lit by a single yellow bulb, the garden a tangle of winter roses peeking through the snow. The front door swung open before she could even knock, and there stood Grandma Alina, bundled in a faded quilted robe, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. Alina's sharp gray eyes flicked over Freya's tear-streaked face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped like she was carrying the world. She didn't say a word about it, just stepped forward and pulled Freya into a hug, her arms sturdy and warm despite the frail look of her. Come on in, dear, she said, her voice rough but soft, like gravel smoothed by a river. There's always a place for you here. You know that. Freya nodded against her grandmother's shoulder, the lump in her throat too big to speak around. Alina didn't press, didn't pry, just ushered her inside, the door creaking shut behind them. The house smelled of old wood and chamomile tea, a faint trace of cinnamon from the oven lingering in the air. It was small, cluttered with decades of life, a sagging plaid couch, a shelf of chipped teacups, a radio humming low with some late-night jazz station. Alina nudged her toward the living room. "Sit, warm up. I'll fix us something hot." Freya sank into the couch, the springs groaning under her, and clutched her duffel like a lifeline. Alina shuffled back minutes later with 2 mugs of tea and a plate of leftover meatloaf sandwiches, crusty bread, a smear of ketchup, the kind of comfort food Freya hadn't realized she needed. She'd missed. They ate in silence at first, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. But the weight of it all, the fight, the fear, the future pressed too hard, and Freya's resolve cracked. "Grandma," she started, setting her mug down with a shaky clatter. "I messed up everything." The words tumbled out, raw and jagged. "Mom and Dad, they kicked me out. Mom said I've disgraced them, that I'm not their daughter anymore, and I'm—" She swallowed hard, tears spilling over. "I'm pregnant. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared." Alina set her own mug down slow and deliberate, her weathered hand resting on the armrest. She let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind that carried years of her own battles, and leaned forward, fixing Freya with a steady gaze. "Oh, child," she said, reaching out to pat Freya's shoulder, her touch firm but gentle. "People say all kinds of things when they're hurt or mad. Lord knows I've heard worse. But listen to me, a child's no disgrace. It's a blessing every time, even when it's hard." Freya sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "They don't see it that way. Dad told me to get out, like I'm some stranger. And Owen, he's gone. Doesn't even know. How am I supposed to do this alone?" "You're not alone," Elena said sharply, her tone cutting through Freya's spiral. "You've got me, don't you? I raised your daddy through worse than this, and I'll help you through it too. We'll manage together." "But what if I can't?" Freya whispered, her voice trembling. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Elena chuckled, a low, raspy sound, and squeezed her shoulder. "Strong enough? Girl, you walked out of that house and made it here, didn't you? That's more guts than most have at twice your age. You'll figure it out, one step at a time. Now finish that sandwich before it gets cold." Freya managed a watery smile, the first crack of light in the dark she'd been drowning in. She picked up the sandwich, the warmth of the bread seeping into her fingers, and took a bite. Elena leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea. The jazz cringed softly between them. For the first time in weeks, Freya felt a flicker of warmth seep into her soul. Within the walls of Elena's little brick house, the chill of rejection, the sting of Owen's absence, the bite of that January night, it all started to thaw under her grandmother's steady presence. Elena didn't just give her a roof. She gave her a lifeline, a foothold to clog her way towards something new. Freya spent the next month settling in, helping Elena tend the winter roses, curling up on the plaid couch with cups of chamomile tea, and letting the quiet hum of the old radio stitch her frayed edges back together. It wasn't easy. Her belly grew, her fears gnawed, but Elena's gruff assurances kept her grounded. "We'll manage, kid. We always do." When the time came, it was mid-August, the air thick with heat, and the promise of change. Freya's water broke on a muggy Tuesday morning, right as she was rinsing dishes in Elena's cramped kitchen. "Grandma," she gasped, clutching the sink, water dripping onto the linoleum. Elena was there in a heartbeat, tossing a dish towel aside and grabbing the car keys. "Let's go, girl. Time to meet this little one." They made it to Springfield Mercy, a small maternity hospital just off the highway. Its beige walls and buzzing fluorescents were a blur as Freya gripped Elena's arm through the first waves of pain. Helena never left her side through the paperwork, the sterile gown, the hours of contractions that left Freya breathless and swearing under her breath. "You're doing fine, honey," Elena murmured, her voice a steady anchor. wiping Freya's forehead with a cool cloth. "Just keep breathing. He's almost here." And then, after a final push that tore a cry from her throat, he was there. A tiny boy, slick and squalling, with a shock of dark, fluffy hair that glistened under the hospital lights. The nurse laid him on Freya's chest, and time seemed to stop. She stared down at him, his scrunched-up face, his impossibly small fists, and her heart cracked open, flooding with a joy so fierce it stole her breath. She cradled him close, her arms trembling as if letting go might unravel the miracle of him. His skin was warm against hers, his little chest rising and falling like a promise. "You're my joy," she whispered, her voice thick with tears, brushing a finger over the tiny hand that latched onto hers with surprising strength. "My secret." Elena leaned over the bed, her lined face softening into a rare wide grin. "Look at that," she said, her voice husky with pride. "A fighter, just like his mama. What a head of hair on him." Freya laughed, a shaky, watery sound, and glanced up at her grandmother. "He's perfect, isn't he?" "Perfect as they come," Elena agreed, resting a hand on Freya's shoulder. "You did good, kid. Real good." The room settled into a quiet hum, the beeping monitors, soft whimpers, the distant chatter of nurses down the hall. Freya traced the curve of his cheek, memorizing every detail, the flutter of his lashes, the way his lips pursed, like he was already dreaming. She'd been terrified of this moment, terrified of failing him, of the life ahead. But now, holding him, she felt something stronger take root, not just fear, but fight. For him. For them. "Think he's hungry?" Elena asked, nodding at the way the baby's mouth rooted against Freya's chest. "Maybe," Freya said, shifting him gently, still marveling at how fragile he felt. "Guess we'll figure it out together, huh, little man?" Elena chuckled, pulling a chair closer. "That's the spirit. You two will be just fine. I've got a hunch about it." Freya smiled, exhaustion tugging at her edges, but the baby's weight in her arms kept her tethered. For the first time since that night on the porch, she believed it might be true. Years slipped by in Elena's little brick house, each one stitching Freya and her son tighter into its cozy fabric. Seat grew from a squalling bundle into a wiry, bright-eyed boy, his dark, fluffy hair now a tousled mop that caught the sunlight. By 5, he was a whirlwind of questions. Why do birds sing? How do clouds float? His curiosity was as endless as the Springfield sky. Freya and Elena took turns answering, marveling at how his mind raced ahead of his small frame. But one sticky summer evening, as the crickets chirped and the air hung heavy with honeysuckle, his questions veered into sharper territory. They were out on the veranda, the old wooden boards creaking under their weight. Elena sat in her wicker rocker, knitting a lumpy blue scarf, her latest project, while Seep sprawled on the steps, a half-melted popsicle dripping orange onto his fingers. The sun dipped low, painting the garden in shades. Of golden pink, the winter roses, long replaced by sprawling marigolds. He'd been quiet for a while, unusual for him, until he turned those big, serious hazel eyes on her, eyes that reminded her too much of Freya at that age. "Grandma," he said, his voice cutting through the hum of dusk. "Why do all the kids at kindergarten have grandpa and grandmas, and I've never seen mine? Mom says you're my great-grandma. What's that mean?" Elena's knitting needles stilled, the yarn tangling in her lap. She'd known this day would come. Kids always sniffed out the gaps in their stories, but the weight of it still caught her off guard. She set the scarf aside, folding her hands to buy a moment, her weathered fingers tracing the lines of a life that hadn't been easy. Sight watched her, popsicle forgotten, his brow furrowing like he could sense the shift. Sight, she started, her voice soft but steady. "That's not a simple question, sweetheart. It's a grown-up mess, and you're still little, but I'll try. Sometimes adults make mistakes, big ones. Your grandpa and grandma, my son and his wife, they got scared a long time ago. He tilted his head, confusion wrinkling his nose. Scared of what? Me. He sat up straighter, the popsicle stick clattering onto the step. I was just a baby when I got born. How could they be scared of a baby? Elena chuckled faintly, though her chest tightened. Not of you exactly, little man. It's hard to explain till you're older, but I'll give it a go. When your mom found out you were coming, it shook them up. They couldn't see how special it was, how special you'd be. They got stuck worrying about what folks around town might whisper, instead of how much your mom wanted you. Side's frown deepened, his strong hands balling into fists. So they didn't want me. His voice wobbled, barely above a whisper, and the hurt in it sliced straight through her. No, no, darling, Elena said quickly, leaning forward to cup his sticky cheek in her palm. That's not true. Not for a second. They didn't know what to do with their feelings. People can be slow to figure things out, and sometimes they miss the good stuff till it's gone. But your mom, she chose love from the start. Chose you. That's what matters most. He stared at her, processing, then turned his gaze out to the garden. The last rays of sun glinted off the marigold, and a breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint buzz of a lawnmower down the street. But you're here, he said finally, glancing back at her, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. You're always with me, right? Grandma, always, my dear, Elena replied, her smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. She reached out, ruffling his hair, because family is not just who you're born to. It's who sticks by you, who loves you through the thick of it. And I ain't going anywhere. Sankt grinned, a gap-toothed flash that chased the shadows off his face. Good, he said, picking up his popsicle stick to fiddle with it. 'Cause I like it better with you anyway. Elena laughed, a low, warm sound, and picked up her knitting again. Me too, kiddo, me too. The rocker creaked as she settled back, the evening wrapping around them like a quilt imperfect, patched, but holding fast. Freya stood at the kitchen sink, her hands wrist deep in soapy water, scrubbing a pot that didn't need scrubbing. Through the open window, the murmur of Side's voice and Elena's gravelly replies drifted in from the veranda, carried on the warm August breeze. She caught the tail end of it. They didn't want me, and her breath hitched. The sponge slipping from her fingers to plop into the suds. Tears welled up, hot and sudden, spilling down her cheeks before she could blink them back. She pressed a damp hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. That old wound her parents' rejection, the sting of being cast out ripped open anew, hearing Segt wrestle with it. But Elena's voice, steady and kind, wove through the pain like a balm, softening the edges as always. Her grandmother knew just what to say, shielding Side's tender heart without dodging the truth. Mom. Sight's voice piped up from the doorway, snapping her out of it. He padded in, barefoot and sticky, fingered his popsicle stick, still clutched like a prize. You okay? Your eyes are all wet. Freya swiped at her face with a dish towel, forcing a smile. Yeah, buddy, I'm fine. Mom. Sight's voice piped up from the doorway, snapping her out of it. He padded in, barefoot and sticky, fingered his popsicle stick, still clutched like a prize. You okay? Your eyes are all wet. Freya swiped at her face with a dish towel, forcing a smile. Yeah, buddy, I'm fine. Just got some soap in my eyes. Stings like crazy. She turned back to the sink, rinsing the pot for the third time. How's Grandma's scarf coming along? It's lumpy, he said with a giggle, hopping onto a stool at the counter. She says it's character. I think it's funny looking. Sounds like Grandma, Freya said, her laugh shaky but real. She glanced out the window again, Alina rocking in her chair, knitting needles clicking, and felt a rush of gratitude. Sight didn't press further, already distracted, chattering about a beetle he'd seen in the garden. She let his words wash over her, anchoring her back to the present. The years rolled on, each one piling new challenges onto their little family. Sid shot up like a lanky-legged mop of hair that refused taming in a mind that buzzed louder every day. By second grade, school became his playground. He was the kid who lingered after class, peppering Mrs. Larson with questions about why leaves turned red or how magnets stuck. Science hooked him harvest biology, physics, anything with a puzzle to crack. He'd come home with library books dog-eared and smudged, sprawling on the living room rug to sketch diagrams of circuits or bug wings. He's got a gift, Mrs. Larson told Freya at a parent-teacher night, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights of Springfield Elementary. Loves solving problems, finds these elegant little answers that make you wonder why you didn't see it that way. And the way he explains it, half the class gets it because of him. Freya beamed, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. He's always been like that. Figuring stuff out drives me nuts sometimes, all those whys. Well, hang on to that, Mrs. Larson said with a chuckle. Kids going places. Back home, Sight proved it daily. One rainy afternoon, he sat cross-legged at the kitchen table. A dismantled flashlight spread out before him batteries, bold, bits of wire. Look, Mom, he called, holding up a glowing contraption. Timmy didn't get how it worked, so I showed him with this. It's just electrons moving. Simple, right? Freya leaned over, ruffling his hair. Simple for you, maybe. I'd have shocked myself silly. You're going to teach me something one day, huh? Only if you stop burning toast, he teased, grinning that gap-toothed grin, and she swatted him playfully with a dish towel. Watching him grow his quick mind, his quiet confidence, Freya felt the ache of those early years' ease. The pain of her parents' absence lingered, a bruise that never quite faded. But Sight's light outshone it. He was her proof that love could build something stronger than fear ever tore down. Freya had carved out a steady rhythm in Springfield, a life that didn't glitter but held firm. For years, she'd waited tables at Rosie's Diner, a squat little joint on the edge of town with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. She'd started there right after moving in with Alina a gig to keep the lights on while Sight napped in the back office, cradled in a second-hand car seat. Dreams of a degree, maybe nursing or teaching, danced in her head some nights, but she'd shelve them. Time with Sig trumped everything. Every shift, every tip, every double she pulled, she socked away into a coffee can under her bed labeled Sight's Future in Sharpie. Pennies, crumpled fives, whatever she could spare it was for him. For college, for a shot she'd never had. But fate, as it often did, had other plans. It was a muggy Thursday in late spring. Freya hadn't slept right the night before. She dragged through her shift, the diner's fluorescent buzz drilling into her skull. Her apron sagged with coffee pot weight, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum as she refilled cups. She was mid-pouring, topping off a trucker's mug, when a wave of dizziness hit. Fatigue, maybe, or the heat. Her foot caught the edge of a chair leg, and she stumbled. The pot-tipped, hot coffee splashed across the table in a dark, steaming arc, soaking papers, a phone, and the lap of a man in a suit that screamed money-crisp navy, tailored, not the kind you grab off a rack at Walmart. Oh my God, Freya gasped, the pot clattering to the table as she snatched napkins from her apron. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean. She dabbed at the mess, her face burning, words tumbling out. I'll clean it up. I swear, I'll pay for it. The man brushed coffee off his sleeve, frowning, his jaw tight. He was older 40-ish, maybe with sharp cheekbones and a slick of dark hair graying at the temples. Freya braced for a tirade, but he just stared at her, silent as she babbled on. I can ask my boss for the rest of the day off. There's a dry cleaner 2 blocks down. I'll run it over myself. He held up a hand, cutting her off, then locked eyes with her. Cool blue piercing. Dry cleaning's fine, he said, his voice low and clipped. But I've got a meeting in an hour. You want to fix this? Bring me something to wear till it's done. Freya blinked, panic spiking. Something to wear? Okay. Give me 20 minutes. She bolted to the kitchen, dodging a busboy, and begged Rosie for a break. It's an emergency. I'll be back, promise. Rosie, a wiry woman with a smoker's rasp, just waved her off with a grunt. She sprinted the 4 blocks home, sweat sticking her shirt to her back, and burst into Elena's house. Syed was at school. Elena was napping. Perfect. She raided the whole closet, shoving past mothballed coats until she found it Grandpa Earl's old corduroy jacket, a relic from the 70s, brown and patched at the elbows, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. It'd have to do. Back at the diner, panting, she thrust it at the man. Here it's not fancy, but it's clean. He took one look at the faded fabric, the frayed cuffs, and burst out laughing a deep, unexpected sound that rolled through the quiet diner. Freya froze, then cracked a nervous grin. It's a vintage. Vintage, he echoed, still chuckling as he shrugged it on. It hung loose on his frame, clashing wildly with his polished slacks, but he rolled with it. Man's Lance, you've got guts. I'll give you that. Freya, wiping her hands on her apron, said, And I'm really, really sorry about the suit. Lance waved it off, adjusting the jacket. Meeting's about to start. We'll settle up after. He grabbed his soggy briefcase and headed to a booth in the back, where Rosie, of all people, slid in across from him. Freya's jaw dropped. She hovered by the counter, pretending to wipe it down as snippets of conversation floated over. Prime location, development deal, offers firm. Later, after Lance left, corduroy swap for his freshly cleaned suit, Rosie filled her in, lighting a cigarette out back. Guy's a land shark, been sniffing around this plot for months. Wants to bulldoze us for some strip mall or condo crap. Freya's stomach sank. The diner wasn't just her job, it was her lifeline. Her savings. Backbone. If Lance botted out, all those years of coffee and pennies might dissolve into nothing. The next afternoon, Freya stood at the corner of Main and Elm, clutching Lance's dry clean suit in a plastic bag. The sun beat down, glinting off Springfield's sleepy storefronts, but her nerves buzzed like a live wire. She was mad fuming, really at Lance's slick land grab scheme, at the threat to the diner that had been her rock for over a decade. When he strolled up, still sharp in a different suit, gray this time, no corduroy in sight, she thrust the bag at him, her jaw tight. Thanks for this, Lance said, taking it with a nod. How much do I owe you for the cleaning? Freya scowled, crossing her arms. Keep your money. I don't want it. He paused, eyebrows lifting as he clocked her tone. Hey, everything okay? You look like you're ready to deck me. Why would you care? She snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're just some land shark, right? Swooping in, not giving a damn about people like me. Regular folks actually need places like the diner to survive. Lance went still, his easy charm faltering for a beat. He just looked at her, those blue eyes unreadable. Then he tipped his head hatless today, with just a slight nod, and turned on his heel. Fair enough, he muttered, walking off without another word. The suit bag swung at his side. Freya watched him go, her anger simmering down to a dull ache. She figured that was that. Another man proving her instincts right. But the next morning at Rosie's, something was off. She pushed through the diner's swinging door, apron half-tied, and froze. Everyone cooks, waitresses, even the old guy who nursed coffee at the counter all day stared at her, grinning like they'd won the lottery. "What?" she demanded, hands on her hips. "What's with the faces?" Rosie barreled out of the kitchen, her smoker's rasp softened by a huge, toothy grin. "You're a damn miracle worker, that's what. That Lance guy called last night, said he's dropping the land deal. Won't touch the diner unless you say yes to dinner with him." Freya's jaw hit the floor. "Dinner with me?" Her mind spun. 15 years, no dates, no flings, nothing. After Owen, she'd locked that door and melted the key. Men were trouble. She'd learned that the hard way. Her life was simple side, Elena, the diner. End of story. And now this. A suit-wearing stranger waltzing in, dangling her livelihood like a carrot. It stank of a setup. "This is nuts," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "What's his angle?" "Don't know," Rosie said, shrugging. "But the diner's safe for now." "You're cool, kid." Freya stewed on it all day, the clatter of plates and chatter of customers a fuzzy backdrop. By evening, curiosity and a nagging what if won out. She called Lance, voice clipped. "Fine. Dinner. But it's at the diner. My turf. Tomorrow, 6 sharp." "Done," he said, a smile in his voice. "See you then." The next night, Rosie's was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the sizzle of the grill. Freya picked a corner booth, still in her work jeans and a faded green tee. No fuss, no frills. Lance showed up on time, toned down in slacks and a button-up, no tie. He slid in across from her, and she didn't waste a second. "Before you get any ideas," she said, leaning forward, elbows on the table, "I've got a son. I'm raising him alone, and I take care of my grandma, too. If you're looking for some carefree fling or a woman without ties, I'm not it. And if this is just a quick thing for you, tell me now. I don't play games." Lance leaned back, a slow smile tugging at his lips. He was 40-something, she guessed, lines etched around his eyes that said he'd seen a few rounds. "Well, damn," he said, chuckling softly. "I've never been brushed off so elegantly before. Usually, women trip over themselves to snag me money, charm, whatever. But you," he shook his head, almost impressed, "you're a different breed, Freya." She narrowed her eyes, not sure if he was mocking her. "Yeah, well, I've got my priorities straight. So what's this about? Why me?" He sipped the coffee she poured black, no sugar, and set the mug down with a clink. "Honest, you threw me off. That jacket stunt. The way you lit into me yesterday. Nobody's talked to me like that in years. Made me think twice about the diner, about you. I'm not here to mess with your life. Just wanted to know you." Freya studied him, searching for the catch. The diner's fluorescent glow caught the gray in his hair, the faint scar on his knuckle. He didn't flinch under her stare. "Okay," she said finally, sitting back. But this, she waved a hand between them, stay simple. "Burger, fries, done. No funny business." "Fair deal," Lance said, raising his mug like a toast. "Simple it is." Rosie dropped off their plates greasy burgers, crinkle fries, and they ate, the tension easing into something quieter. Freya didn't trust him. Not yet. But the diner's familiar hum and Lance's easy laugh chipped at her walls just a little. Over the next few months, that first diner dinner turned out to be just the beginning. Lance kept showing up once a week, then twice each time with something small but deliberate. A bouquet of daisies from the farmer's market. Tickets to a matinee at the old theater downtown. even a suggestion to catch the county fair's fireworks. Freya's walls, built high and thick after years of scars, started to crack. She'd catch herself smiling at his dry jokes or lingering over coffee longer than she meant to. But trust, that was still a tangle. Why her? Why now? Lance was a puzzle too polished, too persistent, and she couldn't shake the itch that there was more to his game. Then one crisp October evening, leaves crunching underfoot, he threw her a curveball. They were finishing burgers at Rosie's, the jukebox miraculously wheezing out a Patsy Cline tune, when he set his fork down and looked at her square. "Freya," he said, voice steady, "I'd like to meet your son. And your grandma, too. If that's okay." She froze, ketchup smudging her fingers. Meet them. Her mind raced. Sagged Alina her messy, sacred little world. Why? Lance shrugged, a faint smile tugging his lips. "Because they're your people. I've been hanging around you for months. Feels right to know who matters most." It blindsided her. 15 years of keeping men at arm's length, and here was Lance, wading into her life like it was no big deal. She mumbled a wary, "Okay," half expecting to regret it. The meeting happened that Saturday at Alina's. Freya fussed all morning, vacuuming the sagging couch, wiping down the kitchen counter twice, her stomach in knots. Lance arrived at 3. No suit this time, just jeans and a flannel shirt, a paper bag of fresh apples from a roadside stand in his hand. "Thought these might go with dinner," he said, handing them to Freya with a grin. Alana took to him like a moth to a flame. She sat him down in the living room, her quilted robe swishing as she launched into a ramble. "Freya's always been a good girl, you know. Strong as they come. Raised that boy of hers all on her own. Never complained once. Worked her tail off at that diner." "Grandma." Freya cut in from the doorway, cheeks flaming. "He doesn't need my life story." Lance chuckled, nodding at Elena. "Oh, I figured that much out already, ma'am. She's tough. I seen it." Elena beamed, patting his arm. "Good. You hold on to that, then." The front door banged open, and Said burst in, backpack swinging, his sneakers caked with playground dirt. "Mom, I'm home. We dissected a worm today. It was so gross." He stopped short, eyeing Lance. "Who's this?" Freya braced herself, but Lance leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Hey, Sieg," Lance said. "I'm Lance. Tell me something, how do worms move without legs? Been a while since I cracked a science book." Sieg's face lit up, shyness evaporating. "Easy. They've got these tiny bristles, seta, they're called, and muscles that squeeze them along like a squishy conveyor belt." He dropped his bag and darted to a shelf, yanking down a shoebox of treasures. Circuit scraps, a magnifying glass, a dog-eared bug guide. For the next 40 minutes, he chattered nonstop, showing Lance a battery-powered fan he'd rigged and a chart of constellations he'd drawn. Lance listened, nodding, asking questions. "What's that wire do? How'd you figure that out?" His smile grew with every answer. Freya watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, stunned. She expected awkward silences or Sieg retreating to his room, not this. This easy, buzzing connection. Elena sidled up beside her, peeling apples for a pie, her silence louder than words. "What?" Freya whispered, catching her grandmother's gleam. "Why are you grinning like that?" Elena sliced an apple with a deft flick, her voice low. "Just thinking, you deserve this, is all. After everything, you and your folks, scraping by a man like that don't come along every day." Freya frowned, glancing back at Lance, laughing as Sieg waved a bent paperclip. "I don't know, Grandma. He's nice, sure, but I still don't get why he's here. What's he want?" Sometimes, Elena said, dropping apple slices into a bowl. It ain't about what he wants. Maybe it's about what you've earned. She nudged Freya's shoulder. Give it a chance, huh? Freya didn't answer, her eyes on Lance and Sieg, two heads bent over a tangle of wires. The room was warm with their voices. For the first time in years, she wondered if her walls might be keeping out more than just herd. 6 months later, spring bloomed wild across Springfield. Lance dropped another bombshell. They were on the veranda at Elena's, the air sweet with lilacs. Sieg was inside, tinkering with a robotics kit. Lance had been quieter than usual, fidgeting with his coffee mug until he set it down and took Freya's hand. Her heart thudded. She knew that look by now, the one that meant he was about to upend her world again. Freya, he said, voice low but sure. I want to marry you. Spend the rest of my life with you, Sieg, all of it. What do you say? She stared at him, the words ricocheting in her skull. Marriage? Her? The diner girl with a kid and a coffee can dream. Lance was a whirlwind she'd never dared imagine steady kind, a man who laughed at her sharp edges and stuck around anyway. Sometimes, lying awake beside him, she'd pinch herself, half convinced he was a mirage. But there he was, real as the calluses on his hands, blue eyes searching hers. You're serious, she whispered, more to herself than him. Dead serious, he said, squeezing her fingers. You in? Her throat tightened, a yes trembling on her lips, but years of caution held it back. Let me think on it, she managed. And he nodded, unfazed, like he'd wait as long as she needed. If that wasn't enough to rattle her, what came next sealed the deal. They talked about her diner job before Lance nudging her to quit, join his real estate firm, help with admin stuff. You'd be great at it, he'd said one night over takeout. But she'd dug in her heels. I like Rosie's. It's mine. Been my lifeline. Plus, I've got Sieg's college fund to build. Lance hadn't pushed, just let it drop with a shrug. She thought that was that. Then a week. After the proposal, he showed up at the house with a thick envelope and a grin that wouldn't quit. Elena was there, peeling carrots for stew. Sieg was sprawled on the rug, sketching gears. Lance plopped the envelope on the kitchen table. Go on, open it. Freya frowned, sliding out a stack of papers. Her eyes skimmed the letterhead Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and snagged on Sir Jensen. Full tuition scholarship. Preemed program. Her breath caught. What is this? His gaze locked in. Lance leaned back in his chair, still grinning. Paid up, 4 years. Med school. Kid set. Freya's head snapped up. You what? Sieg perked up from the floor, eyes wide, and Elena dropped her peeler with a clatter. Been working on it for months, Lance said, laughing. Got connections from the firm. Called in a favor. He's in. Freya starts in, 9 years or so when he's ready, Sieg teased. Stop laughing, she snapped, but her voice cracked, tears pricking her eyes. Lance, this is how did you? She bolted to her room, grabbed the coffee canned from under the bed, Sieg's future half full of crumpled bills, and dumped it on the table. Take it, then. You paid for this, not me. Lance pushed the smile back, his laugh softening. That's yours. I did this because I wanted to, not for a refund. Freya stared at the money, then at him, her chest heaving. Sieg piped up. Does this mean I'm going to be a doctor? Elena cackled, clapping her hands. The room spun with their voices, but Freya's mind was already racing elsewhere. Days later, she had a plan. She pulled those savings, every penny, from 15 years of tips and ordered a custom jacket from a tailor in town. It was gorgeous. Deep navy wool, tailored sharp like Lance's suits, but with a corduroy collar, a nod to that first chaotic day. She wrapped it in a sleek black box, tied with a silver ribbon, and waited for the right moment. It came one quiet evening, just the two of them at Rosie's after closing. The diner was dark, save for a single light over their booth. Freya slid the box across the table, her hands shaky. "Open it." Lance raised an eyebrow, peeling back the ribbon. When he lifted the jacket, his grin faded into something softer. "Freya, this is—" "For you," she cut in, her voice thick. "For showing up. For Seed. For everything. I was so scared to let anyone in, but you're real. Thank you." He ran a hand over the collar, then looked at her, eyes bright. "So that's a yes." She laughed, a tear slipping free. "Yeah, Lance. It's a yes." He pulled her across the booth into a hug, the jacket squashed between them. And for once, Freya didn't fight the warmth flooding her chest. It wasn't a dream. It was hers. Seep sailed through his years at Johns Hopkins like he was born for it. Science wasn't just schoolwork, it was his spark, the thread he'd tugged since he was a kid dismantling flashlights. He aced exams with quiet ease, his curiosity lighting up lecture halls and labs alike. When he graduated med school top of his class, Scrubs swapped for a cap and gown a private clinic in Baltimore, snapped him up before the ink dried on his diploma. At 22, he was a surgeon. Steady hands wielding a scalpel in operating rooms that buzzed with life and death stakes. It was late November that year, Thanksgiving week, when Freya called him home to Springfield. She had cooked up a storm. Turkey with sage stuffing, mashed potatoes drowning in gravy, cranberry sauce tart, and bright all laid out on Elena's rickety dining table. Seat pulled into the driveway, the old brick house glowing warm against the gray dusk, and stepped into a scene that felt like a hug. Freya, now 42, bustled in a plaid apron, her hair streaked with silver. But her grin, as fierce as ever, Lance Pring fully now carved the bird with a practiced hand. His real estate firm thriving, he had just landed a deal for a downtown office block. Freya had hung up her waitress apron years back. She and Lance bought Rosie's when the old owner, Rosie herself, retired at 75, too weary to sling hash. Freya ran it, now manager in title, but queen in spirit. The diner, theirs to keep alive. Eleanor, 90 and counting, sat at the table's head, her quilted robe swapped for a sweater. Her hands gnarled, but her eyes sharp. She regaled them with stories, half true, half embellished, about Freya's teenage stubbornness, while Scythe laughed, picking at a roll. The room hummed with their voices, plates clinking, a fire crackling in the hearth. "Business is good," Lance said, passing the gravy. "But this right here, this is better." "Dan right," Freya agreed, grinning, nudging Scythe. "Dr. Jensen slumming it with us small-towners. How's the clinic?" "Busy," Scythe said, grinning. "Cut open a gallbladder yesterday. Guy's fine now. Thanked me with a fruitcake." "Fruitcake?" Eleanor cackled. "Hope it's better than mine." Then his phone buzzed mid-bite, the screen flashing. "Clinic ER." He sighed, answering quick. "Yeah, okay. I'm on my way." He stood, apologetic. "Emergency surgery. Sorry, got to run. Save me some pie." "Always," Freya said, squeezing his arm as he grabbed his coat. "Be safe." The operation was a beast 6 hours. A woman in her late 60s with a ruptured appendix. Scythe pulled it off, steady as ever, and she came through groggy but alive. He was scrubbing out, still in his green scrubs, when her husband approached, a wiry man, balding, with a tweed coat and a handshake that lingered too long. "WR, Dr. Jensen, thank you," he said, his voice thick. "You saved her." "I can't thank you." "Just doing my job," Scythe said, peeling off his gloves, ready to crash in the break room. But the man didn't leave. He hovered, eyes darting over Side's face like he was mapping it. "You're young for a surgeon," he said, almost too casual. "Where'd you grow up? Springfield, was it? Parents still there?" Sicht frowned, tossing the gloves in the bin. Yeah, Mom's there. Why?" The man smiled, odd and tight. "Just curious." "Good stock, I bet. Raising a kid like you. What's your mom's name?" "Freya," Side said, wary now. "Look, I'm glad your wife's okay, but I've got." The man cut in, stepping closer. He hugged Side quick, then pulled back, gripping his shoulder. "I'd like to meet her. Your mother. The woman who raised a surgeon this bright. I need to thank her, too." Sicht blinked, thrown. Patients got mushy sometimes, sure, but this felt different. "That's nice of you," he said, edging back. "But it's not really a thing we do." "She's busy. I mean it." The man pressed, his voice dropping. Eyes locked on Sides. "I have to meet her. Please." The insistence prickled Side's neck. He forced a smile, shrugging it off. "Maybe someday. Take care." "All right," he turned, heading for the lounge, but the man's stare bored into his back. It wasn't until he was slumped on a cot, replaying it, that the weirdness sank in. The guy wasn't just grateful. He was searching for something or someone. Weeks after the surgery, Side's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He was in the clinic break room, scarfing down a stale sandwich between shifts, when he answered. That voice, gravelly, too eager, pricked Side's nerves. The guy had called twice since leaving voicemails about gratitude and meeting the family. Sicht had brushed it off as overzealous patient stuff, but this was getting old. "Look," the man pressed, "I know it's a lot, but I'd really like to meet your mom. Please, just once." Sicht rubbed his temple, patience fraying. "All right, fine," he said, more to end it than anything. "I'll bring you. But it's quick, okay." Paul's relief flooded the line, and Sicht hung up uneasy. Something about the guy gnawed at him, but he couldn't pin it down. The date came in December, a warm snap melting the frost of Springfield's lawns. Side drove up to his parents' house, the same brick place he'd grown up in, now with a fresh coat of paint and a new porch swing Lance had built. He'd called Lance Dad, since the wedding a quiet shift that fell right. Freya answered his heads-up call with a squeal. "They want to meet us," she said. "Oh, Side, this is big. Proof you've made it." She was over the moon, her dream of Side's success blooming into something tangible. Strangers driving hours to thank the surgeon's parents. Sight set and rolled up the driveway, Paul and Ellen trailing in a battered pickup. Freya burst out the front door, apron dusted with flour. She had been baking cookies, a welcome treat. Her face split with a grin. Sight climbed out, kissed her cheek, and said, "They're right behind me." "Mom, excited to meet you." "I can't wait," Freya chirped, practically bouncing as she started down the path to greet them. Halfway, Lance stepped onto the porch, waving, while Eleanor shuffled out in her slippers, leaning on a cane. But when they climbed out of the truck him in that tweed coat, her in a faded cardigan, Freya stopped dead. Her smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. Sicht clocked it instantly, jogging to her side. Paul's eyes were red-rimmed. Ellen's were wet and puffy. They'd been crying hard. "Mom," Sig asked, touching her arm. "You okay?" Freya nodded too fast. "Fine, honey. Everything's fine." But her voice wobbled and her eyes glistened. He frowned, glancing between her and the couple. "Do you know them?" She swallowed, tears spilling over as she turned to him. Sighed, she said, barely audible, "Meet your grandparents." The air sucked out of the yard. Ellen burst into sobs, hands flying to her mouth, while Paul stood rooted, shaking, tears streaking down his weathered face. Sight's brain stalled. grandparents. But before he could speak, Paul stepped forward, voice breaking. Freya, he rasped, looking straight at her. I'm so sorry. I've missed you every damn day. We were fools, scared, stupid, and I want to fix it. Please. Freya stood silent, tears tracking down her cheeks, her hands clenched at her sides. Lance edged closer, protective, but she waved him off, eyes locked on her father. Ellen hiccuped through her sobs, stepping up. We're sorry, Freya. So sorry. We were wrong. And you've got every right to shut us out. But your boy, she glanced at side, pride cutting through her grief. He's incredible a surgeon, saving lives. My grandson, I'm so proud, and I hate that we missed it all. Freya hadn't spoken to her parents since that frigid night when she'd walked out of their house with a duffel bag and a broken heart. She cut them off clean, blocked calls, returned unopened letters, built a wall they couldn't breach. Paul and Ellen only got scraps of her life through Eleanor, who'd relayed updates in clipped, reluctant tones over the years. Freya's working at the diner. Side's born healthy. Boy, she's managing fine now. Standing in the driveway, Paul turned aside, his voice thick with tears. Grandson, we're family. You've got to know that. Side's arm tightened around Freya, his jaw set, hazel eyes hard. He hugged her closer, then faced Paul. My family's right here. Mom, Dad, Grandma, that's who raised me. But Mom's always been good to guests. If she says you can come in for tea, you're welcome. Freya wiped her eyes, steadying herself, her lips pressed thin, her tears drying into resolve. She glanced at Side, then nodded once. All right, come in. We'll have tea. Her voice was ice, but it cracked the door open just enough. Paul nodded, wiping his face with a shaky hand, and Ellen murmured a choked thank you. Sid hung back, watching them shuffle toward the house. His grandparents strangers, with his mom's eyes, his mind reeling. Freya squeezed his hand as she passed, a silent, we'll figure it out. The door creaked shut behind them, the warm glow spilling onto the lawn. Sig followed, braced for whatever came next. Inside, the living room was a cocoon of warmth, the fire spitting embers in the hearth. Lance sat by Eleanor's armchair, reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a ritual he'd started when her eyesight faded and her joints stiffened. She leaned back, eyes closed, her breathing shallow but steady. The group shuffled in, and Freya's tones stayed frigid as she gestured to Paul and Ellen. Lance, these are my parents, Paul and Ellen. Lance looked up, closing the book with a soft thud. He stood, offering a handshake firm, neutral, his gray eyes sizing them up. Paul Ellen, he said, nodding like he was piecing together a puzzle he'd only heard about in fragments. No warmth, no judgment, just a quiet wait and see. They settled into an uneasy circle. Freya enside on the couch, Lance back by Eleanor, Paul and Ellen perched on the edge of a love seat like they might bolt. The silence stretched, heavy as the steam rising from the teapot. Freya sat on the coffee table. Cups clinked, spoons stirred, but no one spoke until Eleanor's voice cut through frail, yet fierce. Paul, she said, eyes snapping open, pinning her son where he sat. I hoped you'd come to your daughter with an apology long before now. Decades I waited. Paul flinched, setting his cup down too hard. Mom, we didn't mean to hurt her. We were just scared. Eleanor interrupted, her tone a blade. Freya was a child 17, pregnant, alone, and you turned your backs because you couldn't handle the responsibility. Don't tell me what you meant, tell me what you did. Ellen's hands twisted in her lap, her voice small. We were always worried about her, meh. Always worried. Eleanor scoffed, leaning forward, her cane tapping the floor. You'd have worried if you'd helped. If you'd called, visited, sent a dandyne for that boy. But you didn't. You left her to me, and she built a life anyway. Anyway, a good one. Raised a son who saves lives. Married a man who'd walk through fire for her. This family, she swept a trembling hand across the room. It's hers, and there's no place for you in it until you own what you threw away. Paul's face crumpled, tears pooling again. We were wrong, Mom. I know it. We both do. We didn't know how to fix it. Ellen nodded, sobbing quietly. We're so sorry, Freya. We don't deserve anything, but we're here now. Freya sat rigid, staring at the steam curling from her untouched tea. Side's hand rested on her shoulder, steady, while Lance watched her, waiting for her lead. The room held its breath, Eleanor's words hanging like a verdict. Freya finally looked up, eyes wet but unyielding. Sorry's a start, she said, her voice low, but it's not enough. Not yet. Paul nodded, swallowing hard, and Ellen clutched his arm, both of them diminished against the family they'd lost. Lance picked up the book again, his voice quietly returning as Eleanor leaned back in her chair and let out a breath. You never really understand a person. The tea became cold while the fire continued to crackle. Perhaps it was time hanging in the solitude, or perhaps it was the first frail thread of something forgiveness.